Hello, everyone. My name is Molly Yanis, and I'm the founder of Echo Consulting. And today we're going to be giving a webinar on how to implement a project management system or a task management system, depending on the way you want to call it. So I'm going to go ahead and dive right in. We've got a lot of content to share today. So my company is called Echo Consulting, project management that fits. So we specifically focus on project management services, strategic planning, prioritization, software implementations, process improvement, etc. We are a Smartsheet aligned partner. We are doing a lot of task management implementation as we speak. But today I want to show you and give you tips and tools that we've learned the hard way so that when you implement your task management system, you can move faster than we did. For rules of engagement, I'm the question queen. I love questions. Please don't hesitate to interrupt me. You can unmute yourself and ask it if you don't feel comfortable with that. There is a chat feature. You can go ahead and write in your questions, and Melissa will be managing that. You can also go ahead and send your email. If we do not have your email yet, we will be sending both the recording for this session as well as the actual slide deck itself. So feel free to take notes, but we will be sending this over after the fact. We will also send over a brief survey just to find out how useful you found it and if you have any feedback, because we do give pretty regular webinars at this point. So today what we're going to be talking about is the implementation plan for a task management or a project management system. So we'll go through plan, design, build, test, pilot. We'll give you lots of tips that you can immediately implement. We'll also be talking about adoption best practices, change management, and how to really get buy-in so that the actual rollout and return on investment for your new task management system is as great as you expect it to be. So before we get started, we want to do just a really quick recap of the previous webinar we gave, which was how to select a project management system or a task management system. So as a quick reminder, what is a project management system? Pretty much what it is it's a software, what will be done, by whom and when. So you're looking to identify new work, track ongoing work that is happening, report on the work status to different stakeholders, and prioritize the work in terms of which work is more important in a given day or a week in order to meet the goals of your organization. Make sense? So that's a really high level, what is a project management system? Examples of softwares for project management systems. So Trello, ClickUp, Smartsheet, Project, Jira, Atlassian, Wrike, Monday, Teamwork. There's so many different ones. There's literally hundreds of different softwares for task management. If you have an ERP or a CRM, oftentimes those will have task management components and automation as well. Today, we're going to be talking a little bit more about the process associated with implementing a task management system. We're not going to be specific to any one task management system vendor like Smartsheet, ClickUp, Project, etc. So as a quick recap of the webinar we gave, I think 2 weeks ago now, Melissa, and we'll send out this link as well. We did a webinar on how to select the right task management system or the right project management system. We talked a little bit about defining the high-level business requirements, how to research and compare software, and really identifying what those selection criteria were. We talked about building consensus within the teams, as well as doing an initial gap analysis in terms of what the current state is and what the future state is and what functionality you need in order to get there. So again, if you're interested in and you're still in the process of selecting what project management system makes the most sense for your team, we do have resources on that and we invite you to review. So with that said, I'm going to jump right into the implementation plan. This is a very high level. This honestly works for any software implementation. There's a planning component, a design, a build or develop, a testing component. We recommend a specific pilot and then also the cutover activities to actually bring it to production, have it go live, and have that be your new system of record for your tasks. Okay, so we break it down into two kind of main areas. So we recommend typically an iterative approach for designing, building, and testing. So if if you're an agile team or something along those lines, like this is kind of where we're going with this. But this concept of when you're identifying a task management system, oftentimes there are low code solutions. You don't actually require a official developer to configure it. It can be an expert that's a non-development web development resource potentially. But what we'd like to do is say, we have an idea of a high level design, we configure to that, we demo it to the actual users or the product team, we get feedback, and then we iterate in another session. So crawl, walk, run, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So an iterative approach to design, build, test, we have found to be more effective. The other piece is for training and adoption. We recommend that training start as early as the test phase with champion development, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Do training all the way through the pilot phase and into the cutover, rather than just doing training at cutover. So we'll talk a little bit more about some of those recommendations later on. I always like to call out the importance of change management. This is not specific to implementing a task management system, but definitely any software implementation or project in general. We have a little quirky example for change management. You may have heard something similar, which is, I think it's a Tuckerman's approach. So this concept of form, storm, norm, very similar concept. So are you engaging the right stakeholders early on and articulating the goals so that all the stakeholders are aware? Are you identifying what those conflicts are between the stakeholders in terms of what they think is most important and what their goals are for the system? Understanding that there's often different visions to start out. How are you working to harmonize those so that you can work together? So there's oftentimes compromising, negotiation, trade-offs between team members, and then how do you articulate that shared vision of the entire team and all the stakeholders, so that they can own the solution going forward, that there's alignment, that there's buy-in, there's governance, so that once you do the initial implementation, you can keep moving with the system. You're really kind of building the foundation first, and then iterating and moving on with the system. So looking for kind of a flexible scenario. So we call it the ECHO method: engage, conflict, harmonize, and then own the system going forward. So again, that would be change management. So we're going to dive right into the plan phase. So for the plan phase, standard plan phase deliverables make sense for a project management implementation as well, project management system implementation. So you want to make sure you have that business case. Why are you doing this? You need some sort of project plan in terms of what you're going to be delivering, and what your timeline looks like. A budget for the solution, whether it is, the licensing costs, the people hours, if you are hiring a consultant to implement for you, like what is it going to cost you to get this task management system stood up? Who's the project team members? Who's going to be a decision maker? Communication plan, schedule, testing plan, training plan. So these are very common deliverables across any project. What I like to do is call out other important deliverables that are very specific to the task management system rollout. So we want to make sure that there is a licensing plan, so we understand who needs a license and what that cost is going to look like. We want to make sure that we have a data plan. We'll talk a little bit more about this in terms of, like, are you coming from an existing task management system or project management system and you need to migrate over? Or are you right now, distributed across lots of different systems where your tasks are managed? We need an actual system architecture. So how are you breaking down the work chunks? And we'll talk a little bit more about that. We need a governance plan and then a cutover plan. So again, moving from your current state to your future state. And we'll be talking about each of these deliverables and some of the gotchas associated with them. So again, licensing plan, data plan, system architecture, a governance plan for how you're going to make changes to the system going forward, and then an actual cutover, how we move from one system of record, your current solution, to the next solution. Any questions on these important deliverables? All right. In that case, I will keep moving. So we'll move into the design phase. So it's really important that you identify your stakeholders. I'm calling out just some of the core stakeholder groups and user groups that you'll need for the design of a task management system. So typically you have senior leadership and or decision makers or project sponsors. You're going to have some sort of system admin that is going to be responsible for administrating the task management system. You're going to have someone that's requesting the work, someone that's reviewing the work, and someone that's doing the work. Okay. So when I look at this and I think about a task management or a project management system, I group them together into user roles and personas. And so we have this concept of, if new work is coming in, how is that new work coming in? We have this concept of who is reviewing the work to see whether or not it should be assigned out. And then there's people that are actually completing the work. Now, our first tip is that a user oftentimes has multiple roles. So the example that I've called out is you have a manager in a team that requests a new project, but you might have that same manager be responsible for the resources that would potentially be working on that project. And you might have that same manager person also be someone that is completing specific tasks on that project. So very seldom does any one person only play a single role in a task management system. So it's really important to think about from an individual user perspective and what their roles are going to be required within the system. We'll talk about this in a little bit more detail in a second. The way that I oftentimes work with my teams to think about those different roles and what they're going to need to do in the system, I oftentimes use a RASCI chart. So who's responsible for the action, who's accountable, who's supportive, who's consulted and informed. And so I gave just a really basic example. So if you were looking at implementing a task management system, there's some sort of contracting component for the licensing, but also for potentially if you need help implementing the initial system, right? You need to understand how you're going to be able to submit a new project, how you're going to approve a project budget, for example, a project plan, who's responsible for setting that up. Melissa, can you please help with muting anyone that's making noise in the middle? That'd be great. You can have someone that's going to be setting up a new project environment in the task management system, or if there's a change request, right? So these are just ideas of really high level activities. You're going to want to be more granular. And then I have the different roles that we talked about. So that senior leadership, decision maker, and admin, requester, reviewer, doer. So if I look at the contracting component, the person that's responsible and that usually signs the check on the money for the licensing, that's a senior leadership person, right? The person that is responsible for that oftentimes is the actual requester, the person that is asking for the new task management system or the new project. The system admin, the reviewer, the doer, they're just either informed that this is going to be the vendor, or maybe they're supporting choosing what the vendor is. So again, think about what the different activities you need to complete are, who the different roles are, and what their actual responsibility is: responsible, accountable, supportive. Any questions on that? So a way to break down user groups and personas to start thinking about what their role is going to be in the system. Righty. An important component in design that I mentioned is licensing and role management. So are all users going to need a license? If not, how are you going to manage those users? Are you going to be able to potentially integrate with maybe your Active Directory or some other system so that you can pull in their email addresses or their accounts from that other system? Or are you going to have to set each user up individually? Once you set a user up and you know that they each have different roles, how are you going to group them so that when you're managing permissions, you don't have to do it at an individual level? For access and permissions, oftentimes the task management system has different levels. Each task management system is a little bit different, but you want to understand who is going to play the role of an admin, who's going to be an editor, and who's going to be a viewer. There's a lot more to this, but oftentimes what the deliverable is for a licensing is a quote being like, we think we're going to need 8 to 10 licensed users. We're going to need an additional, 10 free users. And then for everyone else, they're just going to be a viewer. We're going to publish the views and things like that. So again, spending time early on before the design, it's really important because as you're actually building out a solution, there's oftentimes decisions about how you're going to build the solution that impact who needs a license and who doesn't. So whether you're a consultant like me and you have a client that wants to limit the licensing, in which case we might spend more on the build or configuration of the solution so that you don't need to have as many licenses on long term, or whether you're someone that, internally like only has a limited budget, only has a certain number of licenses, or maybe only wants to restrict it to a certain number of people that can actually edit the solution because you're trying to manage like a tighter governance component. There's a lot of different components here. I highly recommend that licensing takes part. You have an understanding of what that looks like early on in the process before you actually start building and configuring, because there are key decisions associated with that. Any questions about licensing and role management? This is the gap analysis that we talked a little bit about in our previous webinar, but it's really important to understand what the functionality you're looking for, what the current state or process is. Oftentimes clients we work with are embarrassed almost because they're like, we don't really have a process in place now. It's not working. It's not documented a workflow. That's okay. We still need to level set about where we are. We need to set our baseline kind of where we are now. So in this example, I said, new project is requested. Maybe right now it just happens via an email to a specific person, or maybe it comes out of a meeting and someone has an action item to, create that new project. This is kind of that current state, understanding where you're coming from. What is the future state desirable component? And for this, it's like, okay, what we'd really like to have happen is that a form is submitted so that people can review it. And how would we get there? Well, we need to standardize the required information to submit a new project. Because right now, when we're just sending an email or typing in a meeting, we don't get the same information every time. So there's a core set of information that we need in order to be able to start the project workflow. So by trying to get to this form, we have to first understand what that required information is in order to build out this form. And then we need to take some actions in order to close this gap between the current state and the future state. So who is going to be responsible for submitting the form? Is there information that's going to be required versus optional? Who are going to be the reviewers that get notified about this, about the form being submitted? So this is just one example, but I highly recommend a gap analysis. What the functionality you think you want, what's the current state, what's the future state, gap, and actions to close. Any questions on a high level, understanding of what a gap analysis is and why you would want to complete this in the design phase? All right, we'll keep moving. So when I think about a task management system or a project management system, I want to think about it from a system-wide workflow first. And at a very high level, we have this new work intake, whether you call it a project, whether you call it an initiative or a support ticket or whatever type of task you're thinking about, there's some sort of new work. How does that new work get identified? And I call it intake. So new work intake. Then there's actually the tracking of ongoing work. So that's when the work is getting done and people want to know what the status of it is. And then there's this close archive so that this project work, once complete, gets moved somewhere else so that it's not cluttering up with all the stuff that actually needs to be getting done. Okay, so at the highest level, new work comes in, track the work getting done, work gets completed and is moved off the list. So with that, when the new work comes in, usually there's some sort of approval process to say, yep, this is legitimate work we should be working on. There's some sort of prioritization. Someone has responsibility for saying, yep, this is work we should be working on. There's an actual component in the system of setting up a project or setting up an area where those tasks can get added. And usually this is a system admin role. There's the tracking of the ongoing work. And then there's usually some sort of like go, no go, go live approval process associated with, yep, this is ready to be moved into production or is ready to move to close so we can get rid of it. And then there's some sort of archive process, which is, okay, we were working on this now it's complete. What do we do with it? So this is an extremely simple version, but if we think about that task management system, these are kind of those core components that you need to think through the design of. So we're going to go into, this is kind of system-wide, so you might have multiple projects, multiple teams or organizations all managing tasks in the same system. When I think about a specific project or initiative, I have the same concept. I have the intake. When does it start? Who's requesting that project happens? How does it get reviewed, assigned, approved so that the work can actually get done? And who's completing the work? And again, different users, who's requesting, who's reviewing the work, and who's doing it. I always recommend to my teams that you start at a high level, even though it is like very simple, and then progressively elaborate and break down the work. The next breakdown I'm going to show you is by user. That's the way I think about it. And then we actually move into, with clients, oftentimes specific project criteria that are going to drive additional workflows. So intake, review, assign, complete work. If we break that out and we think about the requester, so I am a marketing manager and I want an upgrade or a new marketing tool stood up. So I'm going to fill out a form and say, hey, IT, I really want to stand up this new, I want to stand up this new tool. I want to stand up Google Tag Manager, right? Once I submit this form, I want to know what's going on with it. Like, is it been reviewed? Has anyone checked it out? Like, is someone working on it? When's it going to be complete? Once the work has been completed, assuming that it was approved, I want to say, yep, you met my needs. You did what I asked you to do by submitting this form. So again, very simple, but if I'm a requester, I'm saying I'm the marketing manager. I'd like to set up Google Tag Manager. I'm submitting a form saying, hey, please, can you help me set up this software? I want to know what's going on with the project while it's happening. And then I want to approve to say, yep, you actually completed what I asked you to do. The reviewer, oftentimes a manager, like a resource manager, that's the person that's going to review the request, the intake form, the project request. They need to assign it out, pick what resources are available, and then they want to assign that out. And then they might not be involved in that project day to day, but they do need to be able to view the status of all of their resources, all of their team members, and what they're working on at any given time. And then from a doer, a task doer standpoint, that person has been assigned the work. They need to complete the work. And then they need to say, you know what, this is ready now. So it moves back to the requester to approve, but they want to know, hey, all this work I did, is someone actually using it? Did it actually go live? So they want to be able to see the status that the project actually had value and is in production as being utilized. So really high level, does everyone understand? So when we talk about task management system, for each of these big components, we need to come up with a design associated with how that's going to work in that system, what business processes are going to support that as well for your teams. All right, I'm going to keep moving. Keep it simple, stupid. One of my favorites. Okay. So we don't want to overcomplicate things. What I don't want to do is go deep, deep, deep into a very specific use case early on. We start simple and then we progressively elaborate. So we're going to talk next about data plan. And with data plan, I tell my teams reduce, reuse, and recycle. So if you have an existing system, if you already have a task management system and you're looking to migrate to another one, or whether you don't have a system in place, but maybe you have Excel spreadsheets here or a Word or Google Doc here and a bunch of different places. The first thing you want to do is get rid of what's called rot. So redundant, out of date, or obsolete, or trivial data. So you don't want to move new data, like you don't want to move old dirty data into your new task management system. So before even configuring, before even the build phase, I highly recommend that you look at what your data structure is and how you can reduce it, how you can delete what you don't need. The other piece that I say is reuse. So one of the other big risks and issues that I see our clients move into is that they move to a new system and they want to start from scratch. They want to like start all new drop downs, all new statuses. They want to redefine everything. That can be really hard. What you're doing is you're adding additional variables into a change management system process that can really confuse users. So you're no longer just training a user on a new system, you're actually training them on a new data set and definitions. And it can really be a major blocker and a major issue for adoption of a new system if people don't feel like they're speaking the same language and they have to understand the new language as well as the new system and functionality. So try to minimize the variables when possible. Also standardization. So if you're moving to a new system, like let's say I've got a client that's moving from like Trello over to Smartsheet. Now with Trello, they might have a certain set of statuses and the Smartsheet out of the box might be a little bit different. If possible, if you have multiple teams, or if you have multiple teams and or multiple projects, what you're looking to have is a what I call core data that's standardized across. And what that allows you to do down the road, when we talking about kind of dashboard views and things like that, is it allows you to roll up, right? So recycle. So if someone already has a template or someone already has a data set that's working, you want to start from that, try to use it, and only change that if there's a specific need to change that. So again, reduce, try not to bring in old crappy data into the system if possible. Reuse, so don't start from scratch. If there's templates, etc., you want to start from there. Recycle, try to use it with the same, try to use the same data across multiple different teams versus starting from scratch every time. So for data types, when we think about a task management system, we want to talk about standardized data that I talked about, core data that everyone needs versus non-standardized data that might be custom per project or per team or per department. There's system data versus customized data. Then there's also required versus optional. So if we think about a system, component or standardize, you might have status. Status is one that almost all project management systems have, and the top three sizes are usually not started, in progress, complete. So if you start a brand new template, a brand new plan from pretty much any project management system, you're going to have a status column. It's going to be a system column, and it's going to be, not started, in progress, and complete. Now, different teams have different needs in terms of statuses. You might need, for example, on hold or canceled or new. There's other statuses. What you like to do is start from what they give you if possible, and then make changes if there is a specific use case need for that change to happen. When you have a drop down capability, I'll just mention this here. I really recommend that you keep drop downs to 8 or less options. When you start going more than 8, you really struggle with that. In terms of standardizing and in terms of how you can graphically represent data down the road. The other piece I mentioned is column types. So this is kind of going back to that system piece as well. One of the really important things early on when you're configuring a new system is understanding what column type it is. So is it just a text, open text number? Is it a contact column? Is it a date column? Is it a drop down? Is it a multi-select or not multi-select? Are they able to, put something in the drop down that's not already there? Check boxes, symbols, things like that. So understanding what the content type looks like. Questions on data types? We're moving really fast. All right, when we think about system architecture, what I'm talking about is how you are, like, what the hierarchy is. So if you think about at what levels you're going to be wanting to provide visibility to work. So oftentimes the most granular level is the task. It's the smallest. You might have tasks, activities, checklists down here. Those oftentimes roll up to either a sheet or a board view that we'll talk about in a second. This could be kind of the project or initiative level. Then there's some sort of what I often think of as programs or folders, like some sort of organization, so that a project, for example, might have multiple different templates associated with it. You might have the project plan, you might have a communication plan, you might have a RAID log, you might have a budget, you might have lots of different components. So you need to group those together, and oftentimes there's some sort of functionality where you're grouping it together in a folder. And then last but not least, you're doing workspaces. And this is where the typical permissioning structure comes into play. So this is where you would like to, the highest level component is what you would like to be managing permissions on. So project team level or a program level or something like that. Now, different project management systems have different levels of hierarchy. So for example, ClickUp, I think Melissa put together a hierarchy for that, maybe has 8 levels. So they have checklists, moves to tasks, moves to, a list, and moves to, so there's multiple different levels. So every different project management system has a different hierarchy, but you want to understand what makes the most sense for how you organize it based on their capabilities. What you don't want to do is be fighting against the hierarchy of your project management system the entire time you're using it. One of the biggest issues, and actually oftentimes what clients come to us with because they're having such a hard time, and they actually end up wanting to migrate to a new system because they can't make their project management system work for them because they didn't get this workspace level information correct. They didn't break down the work in a logical way. And so they're constantly fighting against it. So some examples of that. If you maybe are setting up the workspace by, for example, department instead of actual like function or workflow or value stream, right? So you're saying, okay, I have a workspace for marketing and a workspace for IT and a workspace for sales, for example. Well, oftentimes when you're looking at a given project, it's actually cross-functional. So a sales like CRM project actually includes more than just the sales team, right? It includes IT, it includes marketing. So how are you managing those cross-functional projects? So this is a time, we oftentimes do an entire workshop on the system architecture, taxonomy, and things like that. I highly recommend you spend time putting together that high-level hierarchy. It does not necessarily exactly match your organizational structure. You want to make sure that you have a very solid understanding of your task management system and how that hierarchy works so that you know how many levels you have and what those relationships are so that you can have this right design. If you are going to pay a consultant to help you with a task management implementation, this is the area that you really want to use them on because they have experience with that system and they can help you create the architecture that allows you to build that foundation for flexibility and growth long term. All right, I'm going to keep moving. So we're going to move on to the build phase next, and we're going to start with the build phase with crawl, walk, run, one of my favorites. Okay, crawl, walk, run. So building the simplest piece first, understanding that you start off manual and then you move faster and faster as you gain momentum, right? Trying not to over engineer and gold plate the system from the very beginning. Start small, build gradually. Okay. Really important whenever you are starting with a new task management or project management system, it is really important that you avoid starting from scratch. Even if you will eventually go from scratch, it is important to first familiarize yourself with templates that already exist, right? So if you start from an existing solution, start from an example project, look at that first and then customize it to meet the needs of your organization. It is easier to acclimate and learn a new system by starting from an existing set versus trying to start from scratch. You'll also be able to catch different potential longer term issues that you're building if you're starting from scratch, starting from an existing solution versus starting from scratch, which might be oversimplified. Okay, where this is an example of Smartsheet. So Smartsheet has something that's called the Solution Center, but a lot, a lot of the different task management systems will have templates already set up that you can start from, and then you can edit from there. Okay. With any project management system, you probably captured this when you were selecting the project management system, but you want to think about the different views that you have available to you. So oftentimes there's some sort of grid or list view. There's a card view, Gantt view, calendar view. Those are very common. Other view examples, a list view, I think ClickUp, Monday, Basecamp, etc. A board view, a little bit different than card, but not very. A box view. So this is more kind of that like very early stage dashboard concept. And then a calendar view as well. So again, there's a lot of different views. There's more than even this, but depending on your system, think about what your primary view is going to be, what your options are as you're structuring the data so that you can select the right views. All right, when we think about dashboards, understand that we want to start from a single dashboard and then use that. That way you can brand that dashboard. You can kind of understand and get feedback on how you title things, how you list things, what types of graphs you're using, what the colors are. Once you brand and get a good understanding of the aesthetic of a single dashboard, oftentimes what you can do is you can copy that and then build from different widgets from there. But try to start from, and I oftentimes when I'm doing dashboards, I actually do what I call wireframing. So I'm building out a dashboard. I haven't built all the data sources yet, but I'm looking to get feedback from the team on what they like and what they don't like and what makes sense to them and what doesn't make sense. So oftentimes, rather than waiting until I have all of the data configured, I'll actually just do a quick data sheet that I can pull from that doesn't actually pull the underlying like migrated data and then wireframe out. I oftentimes also with dashboards is I will honestly just Google images of dashboards and copy and paste single components and kind of build a very rudimentary mock-up as well, just to get an understanding of what people are looking for. Any questions about dashboards? There's a lot more to this, but that's just one way of view. So we're going to go back to the crawl, walk, run. And in this case, I'm going to give a specific example. So when you're setting up a task management system, ideally we want to copy from an existing system template, and we start off by doing some manual workflows and think about how that works internally. Then we want to start configuring the actual data and automating the basic workflows that are very straightforward before we actually go into automate, integrate, and customize, right? So crawl, start very small, then you're moving a little bit closer to where you want to get before you run. So this is a progression over time. And this is why, again, I say iterate, like show something little, get some feedback, build out a little bit more, get some feedback, and then run. What you don't want to do is build out complex automations, complex integrations, and customize a lot of things before getting any user feedback. I'm going to just walk very high level through workflows. Almost all of the task management systems have some sort of automation component included in them. If not, there's other business process automation that you can oftentimes integrate with them. In this example, what I'm calling out is that there's a trigger to the workflow. There's a trigger to the automation, like what has to happen in order for this workflow to kick off. There's a condition that is defined. So whether that is a new project or maybe the form was submitted, and then this is going to go to the IT department. In the form, they selected that it was going to be the IT department. So this is the condition that is required for the workflow to happen. And then the last piece is the action or actions, right? So, okay, if someone submits a form and it is an IT project, then what is going to happen? Well, the IT director is going to be notified. The requester, the person that submitted the form, is going to get confirmation that they submitted it, and the status of the project when it gets submitted is going to be moved to in review. Okay. Very basic understanding of workflows. Make sure you understand what the trigger is, what the condition is, and what the actions that are going to follow. Before we move out of the build phase, we want to make sure that we understand that where you're coming from. So if you are coming from an existing system, you really need to have a migration plan in place in addition to that cutover or as part of that cutover plan. If you are not coming from an existing system and you're starting kind of like you're going to be inputting the information directly into the task management system, less important. We'll talk a little bit more about cutover and milestones and how to encourage teams to adopt it. Makes sense? So important to make sure if there's a system record already in place, we need to have a very clear plan of how we're going to migrate that data. In a lot of task management systems, that looks like exporting to Excel and then or exporting to CSV and then importing through CSV. So when you're looking at a system, if you haven't selected it already, make sure you understand whether or not it can, it can export and import, or how you're going to be able to move that data in. Think about that as well from a licensing component. Who is going to be able to move that information in? What level of access will they need? Sometimes people need licenses or different levels of access during the migration, but then can be removed after the fact once the data is already in. So something to consider. All right, so then we're moving into the testing and pilot phase. So when we talk about pilot, one of my recommendations for all my teams is that once you've built something, you've designed it, you've built it, you've done initial quality assurance, and you've actually had someone look at it, I recommend picking either a pilot group or a pilot project to start from. And ideally, you want to find a group that is motivated and is looking forward to the change. And a group that has new work that is coming up. So it is much easier to pilot from the beginning to the end of a project versus starting and like transitioning mid-project. So looking for a champion group. So whether this is a department, so oftentimes with a task management system, the change is being driven either by a marketing or an operations or an IT department. So who's going to kind of kick off that change? Understand that maybe only a limited user set or a small project team is going to be in there at first. You're going to be getting feedback from them. Ideally, we're looking for someone that has new work. When we're doing a pilot implementation, it's really important that it's a short enough duration that you can pilot it and you can constantly be getting what those lessons learned, capturing what those questions that that team is asking for so that you can improve. Now, sometimes that improvement is actually like a system change or a change in the actual functionality. Sometimes that is just an improvement in terms of the way that you're communicating the functionality of the task or training or something like that, right? So pilot. What are the lessons learned from the pilot? What questions were you asked? Improve either the training or the communication or the actual system itself, and then actually moving it to rollout. So whether that is additional projects for that pilot team or whether or not that is across the system. Training, training, training. So critical with a task management system. If you really want to get the return on investment for investing in a new task management system, it's critical that your end users actually adopt it. Because otherwise, no matter how beautiful your views are, no matter how wonderful your workflows are, if you don't actually have the task doers updating the information regularly, the data gets stale and then no one trusts the system and you totally lose out on the task management system value proposition. So it's really, really important and critical that you're providing the adequate training and that you're finding ways to pull people into the system where they have something of high value, where they actually want to adopt and where they actually start providing the momentum. So while you might give the initial push, how do you have users that then ask questions and can be motivated and gain a momentum, right? So we're going to talk a little bit about that. So oftentimes for training types, we start off with like an optional, encouraged, recorded, kind of more passive training hours, like office hours where it's volunteer, webinars, etc. So what we like to talk about for our training plans is like, all right, so exploratory. So who are those early adopters, those people that are really interested in the training? So what can we give them? Whether it is a pre-recorded training from the task management system software, whether that's open office hours for your project team, even while they're still going on it. So anyone's interested can kind of come in, see where they're at, provide feedback. Oftentimes that's a quick reference guide, even if that is just like an initial screenshot where it's not like an official rollout yet, but give them an idea of like, oh, hey, here's the dashboard we're working on, or here's some of this component. So initial is like exploratory. Then we start moving into different training, which is more encouraged. So, okay, now you're expected to attend a live or an in-person webinar, or, oh, now you're going to be a part of this pilot project. Oftentimes we do encourage our clients to have allow for volunteers in these cases. Then we kind of move into those process change announcements and some documentation associated with that. So after we allow them to explore, then we're encouraging them. So we're being more conscious about pushing information out to the teams. And the last stage really is an enforcement. So understanding that we are going to migrate information from your current system to this, understanding that there is a cutover and notifying them and starting to remove permissions to kind of old systems. And then the actual auditing component being like, all right, are you actually in the system? Are you editing it? Who's modified this most recently? So in one client that we're working right now, I've provided a modified, so it's like, okay, this person has viewed something in the last week. This person has viewed something in the last month. So starting to get into the analytics associated with your system. Another great piece of information, make sure that you're aware of what analytics options and what activity tracking and logging options your task management system has, and include that as part of your system admin training. I'm going to talk a little bit more about adoption. So training is just one component of that. When we're thinking about adoption, it oftentimes goes hand in hand with our communication plan. So focusing on the big wins, what's that really important pain point that you're addressing with this task management system? What are the push and pull factors? So oftentimes we talk about the pull factors of being things like dashboards and views of information that maybe managers and or senior leaders didn't have before. So that's what pulls them to the system. Push is when we're actually maybe pushing a notification or something like that to a specific task, or requiring someone to complete a task on a weekly basis, or maybe log their time or something like that. So we talked a little bit about office hours and trainings. Oftentimes our team uses a combination of surveys so that we can baseline what the satisfaction is with the current system, and then also track over time what the satisfaction is with the new system. And we can help use that to measure the return on investment alongside analytics. And then the other important thing of adoption is the governance plan. We're going to be talking a little bit about that, because oftentimes what can happen is that there's this great project team that's pushing this over this finish. They're implementing a task management system, but then once it's out there in the live, there isn't a solid governance plan for making edits long term, and it becomes stale, and people feel like it's not flexible to their needs, and they lose faith in it. So we talk a little bit about governance. Basics of adoption planning and planning in general, we need to make sure we have a plan for adoption, that you're getting the support. Having a senior leader, having a project sponsor for task management is incredibly important. That can really be the person that communicates it out, is the person that supports the team that this change is happening, and encouraging people and telling them why it aligns with the strategic business goals of an organization. Training, we talked about, and then raising awareness. So having it be socialized earlier than when it's actually announcing for the change. We've included this really in-depth, adoption checklist that we use for some of our system implementations. You're welcome to grab anything. And then the governance plan I wanted to talk about really quickly. So this concept of how are people going to request information about training or a defect or a bug, or maybe their permissions aren't correct, or they have ideas or requests for things that need to happen. Who's going to be reviewing those? Who's the governance board for your task management system or project management system? So someone that it's actually going to be able to make a decision. Typically, we recommend that this is like all of the different user groups that are involved in the task management system are included in this. Once that's reviewed, like once this is reviewed, whether or not it's implemented immediately or whether or not we say, nope, this is actually not a change we're making to our project management system, or you know what, maybe it is, but it's backlog. It might happen in the future, but it's not happening right now. How are you communicating this out? So important piece for governance plan. If you are going to go ahead with it and it's been approved and this work is happening, is this work that's going to be happening immediately? It's a hot fix. It's an issue that's blocking people from using it and might block adoption. Or is it something that's approved and then it's going to go through the plan, build, test phase we just talked about and be scheduled as part of a release? Okay. So that's a high level governance plan. So we're ending. I want to make sure that we have plenty of time for questions, and I want to make sure we kind of highlight some of the key takeaways in a task management system implementation. So remember, users oftentimes have multiple roles. Okay, so a person, you need to accommodate all of the different ways that they're going to use the system, not just a single role at a time. That can be a really big issue. So if I have a manager that has to go to 6 different places to see the information that they need because they're both a task doer, as well as someone that reviews work, as well as someone that submits work, they oftentimes get confused about the navigation and how they're supposed to interact with the system. So important for both the training as well as for the system design. Make sure we understand that users often have multiple hats, play multiple roles in the system. Data plan, make the time to do the data cleanup if you're moving from one system to another. Make sure that you're not bringing over old data so that it clouds it up. Make sure that you're reusing any already defined options and only making changes if there's a specific business case for it. And make sure you're recycling and standardizing across teams so that you can roll that up for more executive views. When possible, start from a template, not from scratch. That can help you identify what capabilities are available and give you ideas. And it can kind of start you from a step up. Crawl, walk, run with development. So progressive elaboration, both of workflows and design, as well as automations. Ideally, you want to pilot first. So not just testing in a sterile environment of like, all right, I'm going to test through this workflow, this person, this person, this person, but actually having a real live project and getting feedback from a real project team in terms of what's working for them and what is not working for them. And last, don't go live without a governance plan. This is for any system implementation, but I can't tell you how many clients have implemented a new system, a new task management system, or another software, and they're planning on doing the governance after the fact. That is so much an issue. So it's really critical that we understand and we actually get people practicing how to submit questions, how to submit resources or new user requests and things like that before you cut over, before you go live. All right, questions. A couple of different things. We do offer support for task management implementations as well as project management consulting. Feel free to reach out to us. If you are in the process right now, maybe you're struggling, feel free to book a free consultation with us. We do have upcoming webinar events. So we're going to be doing another webinar, which is how to set up a project management office in Smartsheet. So I've had several different teams reach out to me, not just individual projects, but actually how we roll that up into a program and portfolio and executive view. So we'll be talking a little bit more about that. And that's a specific system in this case. Feel free to follow us on LinkedIn. And then with that, any questions anyone has, anything anyone wants to go over in more depth? Quiet bunch today. Feel free to type it if you don't want to talk. If you don't want to unmute yourself, you're welcome to type. Melissa will read it out.
Oh, excellent. I didn't realize we could jump in. Hello.
Please do. Hi.
My name is Anoma, and I've loved your presentation. This has been super fun. I do implementations for teams in Airtable and ClickUp and Coda. And I loved what you talked about and you called rot. I have not had language for my clients about understanding why they need to remove things. Could you go into a little bit more detail about like how you classify rot when you explain it to a client?
Yes, that's a great question. Thanks, Anoma. So, and I love meeting other implementation consultants, so that's awesome. All right, so when we talk about ROT, so I'll use an example. We did a document migration project for an engineering team for like a Fortune 500 company. And they had, so the first thing we did from a redundant standpoint is they didn't have version control when they originally had the document management system. So they had the same document with different dates associated with it for different versions. So there's a lot of different tools that can be used in that case, but like being able to group documents that are the same document with different versions and only taking like the most recent one. And oftentimes they'll set up like folder structures or things like that. So like an example is, project update requests that maybe are going back 15 years or something like that. Like, okay, it's we don't need to go back that far. Let's archive. Let's only migrate over, for example, what's in the last 2 to 3 years. So redundant, obsolete, which is kind of that timing aspect, and then trivial. So sometimes, especially with the Microsoft 365 kind of rollouts and people moving to OneDrive in the cloud and other things, people will have documents that were never really official, that were more personal, that maybe weren't permissioned correctly, that just don't make sense. So really being structured about what information needs to be involved like within a project and actually needs to go through the migration process to be available. So whether or not it's only active projects or only projects within the last year, only specific documents. So like if they have templates to say, okay, these are the these are the project charters, for example, maybe we only need to migrate the project charters and the budgets and like that set up. So oftentimes what we do for identifying ROT is the first thing we're going to do is identify where all their documents are managed. In most of our clients' cases, they manage documents in multiple different locations, including email, chat. They might have it in like SharePoint or in a shared drive on, and they might actually have it in a task management system. So a lot of the task management systems, so ClickUp you mentioned, Airtable, Smartsheet, any of those examples, they actually have document management in the system as well. So I'm sure you've run into this, Anoma, where you're working with your client to make sure you're defining, are we using an existing document management system that you have, right? Whether it's your shared drive, et cetera, and including a link into the project management system, or are we having the project management system be where you are actually storing documents? So
Absolutely.
one of the examples for my larger clients, especially from like a security standpoint, so like internal and external users, they oftentimes can't share documents with external users for some of their locked down share drives, right? So they actually use the task management system for the early project management documents or the documents that they have to share with external users that don't have access. So we're doing another Smartsheet implementation right now, and the design of the process is that early documents, so what they call like their initial business case and their high level business requirements and like their vendor engagement and contracting documents, those are actually managed in Smartsheet, for example. But once the project toolkit gets set up and like a project has been approved and now there's a project manager assigned and there's those, at that point they have a share point site set up and all document then gets migrated there. So actually as part of their business process, they're moving between systems for where their documents are stored. I went too deep, but does that help?
It does. Thank you for sharing. I've just had a lot of fun even thinking through my current projects and like how I'm painting the picture for the client of what's happening. This has been enlightening and wonderful.
Yeah, great. Any other questions? All right, well, Melissa will be following up, or I'll be following up at some point today. So we'll give you the recording for this session. We'll also send you the deck in case that you would find any of this useful, as well as our contact information. If you're interested, definitely follow us on LinkedIn, reach out if you have any follow-up questions. We hope you are going to have a very successful task management implementation. Thanks, everyone.